I hope that Labour Minister Alan Williams keeps his apparent intention and puts his foot right into the middle of the Pacific Press dispute, this senseless, long drawn-out dispute with stubborn, perhaps greedy people on both sides of the fence. Here we are now, 2.5 months, no sun, no province. Certainly not an essential strike. Nobody can order these people back to work. Nobody lives or dies because of the Pacific Press strike. The fact of the matter remains that one of the biggest sufferers is the public interest of British Columbia. However, let me tell you this. Clark Davy, the new publisher or non-publisher of The Sun, or as we're sardonically calling it, the setting sun, has taken a couple of major steps to reshuffle his editorial content when they get back to work. First of all, Marjorie Nichols, who is the gal now lost in Washington, D.C., has been ordered back to British Columbia, will be writing 5 columns a day out of the legislature when the paper republishes, and will be coming back to cover the start of the legislature expected very shortly. Alan Fotheringham, you may still remember the name, is officially on loan to FP Publications, covering the triumphal worldwide tour of both Mr. Fotheringham and Mr. Clark. Bruce Hutchison, the editorial director of the Vancouver Sun, takes a step backward to become editor emeritus, a fine distinguished newspaperman who will be contributing signed articles in future. However, that's just to keep you in the picture. This morning we're going to start with one of the world's most successful authors, a Canadian, a fellow called Hailey. Writes about wheels and airports and runway zeros, and he's now on with a book called Operation Overload. The incredibly successful Hailey, don't know how good he is, but he's very successful. After this break. How many books altogether, Arthur? I saw it somewhere here. 9 million.
Oh.
How many?
Oh, in print? Oh, there's no way of telling. I go into 30 languages.
1 minute.
9 million is probably low. No, much more than that. Because airport alone. Money changes coming up there too. 25, 30 million altogether, I suppose.
You can take a watch on 1 or 2. Yeah, I think
Take a watch on 1, haven't we?
no, we'll come to you on 1, and he... If this man really thinks he can. Listen, just want to get a picture of a watch.
Oh, we've got 3 cameras, really quite professional.
Come up.
This is the newsroom behind us.
6 in 5.
Arthur, I spent the weekend, part of it, reading your new book, Overload. Do you know what struck me?
Tell me.
It's a good book. Sex in it, drama, murders, killings. It's almost a handbook for terrorists to bring this country to a total stop, isn't it?
There's nothing in there, Jack, that you won't find on record anywhere, and I take the journalist's point of view that if it exists, one is at liberty to write about it.
Doesn't matter the social consequences.
I don't think we're in the social consequence business. This has come up before. There was one thing I modified. In the case of airport, I had in the first edition, too tight a description, too exact a description of a bomb. When that was pointed out, I fuzzed it so it wasn't readable. In this case, there was nothing in there that any terrorist couldn't find out easily by other means.
We'll come back to that in a moment. First of all, I want you to calculate for me, in a certain specific way which we have rehearsed, the number of books you have sold, or the number of books you have written, and what is 20 times 20, and demonstrate your incredible little gimmick that you have there.
Well, actually, I don't think I can get the number of books on here, but I think perhaps, let's say with Overload, there are 210,000 in print, at the moment. Literary Guild will add on another 300,000. So at the moment in North America we have, let me see, 510,000 books in print of Overload.
Just hold that up there. What is that device?
It's a gift from my wife, the Christmas before last. It's a Hewlett-Packard watch. It has time, of course. You press the button for time. It has a memory. That's my publisher's phone number, which is handy on this tour. There's an alarm. It's set for just a minute before noon when I'm due to take a pill. It reminds me there's the date. It's also a stopwatch and it can do all kinds of calculations. I just love gadgets.
You certainly do. That must be your favorite. What would that cost? I'm not doing a Gordon Sinclair, but I'd like to know prices.
Well, I happen to know that when this was bought, which was over a year ago, it was $750. And the only thing you can be sure of is at this moment it costs a little more, I suppose.
Yeah, that's the brass version, of course. It's not gold.
I really hadn't examined it.
Little things like... Now, let's get back to Arthur Hailey's Overload. Now, I don't think we have to tell people, but let me do what I do with Burton. Name for me instantly your 9 most successful books.
Well, Money Changers, Airport, Wheels, now Overload, The Final Diagnosis, way back, Runway 08, In High Places, The Canadian Story, Hotel, a book of plays called Close Up. I guess that's it.
How many major movies have been made out of your books prior to the making of the movie of Overload?
I've had 7 movies until now, and 2 of those have been the long TV movies.
One of those was Hotel was a movie, wasn't it?
Yes, and so was Airport.
Airport. Runway to Zero was a television movie.
No, the 2 television movies were The Money Changers and Wheels. Runway 08 was a very bad movie. Subconsciously, I've even forgotten the title. It'll come back to me.
Arthur, are you not the perfect example, the world's most leading example, of a competent writer who does a research formula and can, at the drop of a hat and after the appropriate research, produce a successful book on any topic?
Well, those are your words. I wouldn't quarrel with them too much, except perhaps formula, the use of the word formula. I don't think there's a formula in any of my books. I've sometimes said if anyone can find it, they're welcome to it. But I have, I think, done my thing. Just as some writers write a profile of an individual and do it very successfully, so I write a profile of a segment of our times complete with technology. And when I do my research, I'm essentially a nosy person. I find out a lot of major things, important themes, but I like the little peripheral, incidental things.
What I'm getting at here, Overload, in case nobody knows, is to do with an overload on an electrical system of a utility giant in California.
Right.
And how it's destroyed or partially destroyed, right?
Yes.
And it's destroyed by the Friends of Freedom terrorists, correct? And by the ecologists and environmentalists. Is that not correct? But meanwhile, you went out and you learned all the little nitty things about how to cheat your local electrical supply outlet by short-circuiting your gas or electric meter. Now, how long did that take you to find out all these little things?
A little at a time, and when I was being told, I didn't dare take notes for fear that this source of information was going to be shut off. And you've got a nugget of information
Give me
here,
that again.
a nugget there. Well, if someone's telling me about the ways that you can steal power, I don't pull out a notebook and write this down because the information is going to dry up instantly.
No, because that little watch is also a recorder.
No, it isn't. That's one thing. If I have a recorder on, I tell people. I never deceive anybody as to what I am or what I'm finding out. But it's patience, you see. I have the advantage of a newspaper man that I can take a year and I can go back a little here. And the other thing, well, there's an old newspaper trick that very often people won't answer a direct question, but it's a facet of human nature that few people can resist correcting incorrect information. If you say, I understand this and this and this, they'll say, oh, no, that isn't so, and then you'll find out how it
Quite a good device. Your biggest attack, though, actually, I don't regard you as a guy with a serious social message, but maybe I'm doing you an injustice.
No, I regard myself as a storyteller. I agree
but
with...
your story here, though, you've obviously got a bit of a hate on against those people who take the phony environmental attitudes that man is not entitled to use his resources to live on this planet, but that we mustn't disturb one dandelion.
There's a lot of phoniness goes under the name environmentalists now. Let me say this, though. We needed the original environmentalists who pointed out how much of natural beauty and natural resources for the future had been abused. But many environmentalists now, and those associated with them, have become fanatics. Protest is their business. They'll stop developments, in this case of generating facilities, at any cost, not by the democratic process itself, but by subverting it. I quote Parkinson's third law: delay is the deadliest form of denial. And because of environmentalists, but also because of a great deal of bureaucracy, which is another subject altogether, electricity development in the United States has been slowed virtually to a standstill, which is why the U.S., beginning in the east and moving westward, is facing an electric power crunch in the early to mid-1980s, and this will certainly spill its effects up into Canada.
We have almost the same syndrome here right now. I don't know who to believe, whether or not we should have the high dam at Revelstoke or no dam at all, or whether or not the whole thing's going to sweep down and drown us all. One is so confused by these people, and there isn't much leadership on this topic, is there?
No, there isn't.
You can't believe anybody.
That's what I come back to, the bureaucratic maze. Now, I've written about California. Actually, in terms of electrical supply, it's my understanding that Canada generally is in better shape. But, of course, the economic effects of an electrical famine in the United States will make their way northward.
I want to quote a little bit from the book. I think it's worth reading, because I think they represent your own personal right-wing views. Some of those who call themselves environmentalists have ceased to be reasonable believers in a reasonable cause and have become fanatics. They are a minority, and they go on prostituting the democratic process, using it ruthlessly to difficult word, everything but their own narrow aims. Is that not what you yourself believe?
I do, yes. It wasn't what I believed when I started writing this book. However, I want to say that elsewhere in that book, where Laura Bow Carmichael, the chairman of the Sequoia Club, speaks of the environment, I've put everything I can into that, and I don't think there's an environmentalist who will want to add much to what I've written to her point of view. It's a fair point of view.
More with Arthur Hailey. Arthur Hailey, author of, among other things, his latest fantastic bestseller, Operation Overload. Not Operation Overload. Overload.
Overload, right.
Tell me, Arthur, you have an English accent of sorts.
I was born in Britain in a place called Luton.
Luton, Bedfordshire.
Right.
Used to make trucks there.
And hats.
Hats, too. Bowler hats?
Bowler hats, store hats.
Any kind of hats. Where are you? English, Canadian, or Bahamian?
I'm Canadian. I came to Canada during World War II to train as a pilot, loved this country, and came back as an immigrant in 1947.
Oh, good year for immigrants.
Yes, it was. Lived here for 20 years, then about 4 years in the Napa Valley in the United States in the country.
Napa Valley.
And then in 1969, I went to the Bahamas.
Did I ask you why? In view of the fact that we're in such friendly terms this morning, I suspect the answer may well embarrass you, but why did you move to Bahamas?
It doesn't embarrass me in the least. I went to the Bahamas on my lawyer's advice because the Bahamas is a tax haven with no income tax. My wife and I intended to stay there 2 years. We stay there now, almost 10 years later, because we love it. It's a beautiful place to live in many ways.
So you had to move your residence?
Yes.
To the Bahamas to qualify for no income tax?
Yes.
Doesn't that bother your conscience?
Not in the least. There are two kinds of things where income tax is concerned. There's tax evasion, which is illegal, and tax avoidance, which is perfectly illegal. The individual...
Tax evasion is illegal?
Evasion is illegal.
And tax avoidance is legal. Right.
Any individual is perfectly entitled to arrange his or her affairs so that he can take the best advantage of any tax situation under the law. I don't have to lie awake nights wondering.
Well, that's a little bit specious, Arthur, a little bit specious. You're not evading or avoiding, you're just skipping.
You're putting in a phrase which doesn't exist. Let me ask you an honest question. If you had the choice of living in a cold climate and paying a lot of taxes and living in a warm climate and paying very little taxes, which would you choose?
I'd live in a cold climate and pay a lot of taxes.
Well, of course you would.
No, but the point I'm
I can see
making
that
is...
halo shining right now.
That's why I've got a bit of a headache this morning. No, the point, and you know, one doesn't like to harass a person on the...
Hey, you ask anything you want about
Anything
this.
you want to
I've
talk.
nothing to be ashamed of or defensive
Well,
about.
why don't you're going to live permanently in the Bahamas?
Nothing is permanent in this life, but for the time being, I have no plans to move.
So therefore, while you are proud of being a Canadian, you don't want to pay taxes to help your suffering Canadian citizens with their present load of Trudeau or Clark and all their feather-bedded bureaucracies.
Those are your words. I would say that I don't think any Canadians pay more taxes than they need to. It so happens that Canada is one of the countries in the world that does not tax its citizens overseas. Everybody pays some taxes. I have a Canadian company.
Oh, yes, of course. I was going to say that.
Taxes.
I mean...
But there comes a point, particularly with an author, where the taxation goes beyond all reason, that an author can wait many years for the big break. And when it comes, wow, if you sit still and let it happen, the tax authorities will take almost all of it away from you.
There are countries which give special tax-free privileges. I think it's Ireland, ERA to be precise, to resident authors. Is that correct?
I've talked to some authors. Yes, you're right, some authors who've been there, but there are a lot of catch-22s in the island situation. The Bahamas is quite uncomplicated.
And a good place to live,
and
obviously.
a better place to live.
But even at that, I see a little squib in the Strikers newspaper the other day, can't find it again, I keep losing these little bits, that you've quit, that this is your last book, that this is the last hurrah of Arthur Hailey, round the continent to flog his books.
Well, you're a man of strong statements, Jack. Basically, that's true. I've announced my retirement. I would not go so far as to say I'll never write another book, but I've worked hard for a long time. With me, a book is 3 years of total involvement. I'm seldom away from it, mentally or physically. And I'm tired. And I have a good marriage. I'm 58, 59 next April. And who knows how long there is left. And I want to enjoy some of this.
Yeah, you could go at any moment.
Exactly.
Especially with high blood.
Here. It would send your ratings up, wouldn't it?
If your alarm doesn't ring and... Will the crew please be quiet and only applause when the card goes up? Especially if your little alarm doesn't ring and you forget to take your pill and whammo, Arthur Hailey, Operation Forgetfulness.
Well, anyway,
No,
I'm going to take it easy.
Touch wood. I don't blame you in the slightest. 58, did you say?
58 right now, yes.
You don't even look 55,
Oh,
I shudder
come
to
on,
tell you.
that's,
But no more books. Done. Finito.
No, I said, okay, I'm going to retire. The reason I say retire is I don't want a contract. I'm convinced my publishers I don't want to sign another contract because that's an obligation. But just as Frank Sinatra comes out of retirement once in a while, so may I, not to sing, but perhaps to write another book.
In other words, if you have to do it without a deadline, you may pass the time between skin diving or whatever you do in the Bahamas.
Jack, I'm so constituted that if I have a commitment, I get on with it. And that's why I don't want a commitment for a long time to come.
Tell me, Arthur, I'm not going to read out the books again, but which do you regard, apart from Overlord, which you would say automatically is your best book, because that's the one you're selling, do you regard as your best work?
An author's not the best judge of his own work, but up to this point, I was fond of the Money Changers, and I was delighted with the reaction that received. But I think an author shouldn't judge his work. You get too close to it.
I suppose. So mind you, I know when I've done a good program, and I know when I've bombed, and you presumably know when you've
Yeah,
done
you
a good
know
book,
that,
and you know when you've bombed.
But the woods are full of reviewers and critics out there. I prefer them to make those kind of assessments.
One last aspect before I'm going to get people to talk to you on the phone this morning, because as I recall from radio, you're very good on the phone. One last aspect before somebody else asks you. You were a bleeding real estate salesman.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't get much lower than that.
Actually, I did pretty well at it. When I first came to Canada, I couldn't get a job in writing, and I had a child, and a wife and child, and I needed the money. The only thing was, I remember at that time in Toronto, I was selling real estate, and it was right after the war, and you were afraid to leave the phone at night for fear someone would call in. And there was one little property I was handling in Vaughan Road in Toronto. I almost had the sale, and I think the price was about $5,000, $6,000, and a young couple, he's got his war gratuity, and they were almost sold, and then they brought Dad out one night to see it. Dad, a veteran of World War I, and the old boy came along and looked at this for $5,000 or $6,000. Oh, shocking, don't buy it. I got to wrung the old devil's neck. I lost that sale. There was a
heartbreaking.
lot of heartbreak in that.
And this is your life, Arthur Hailey. After real estate, what did you do?
Then I went to work for a publishing company, McLean Hunter, as an assistant editor of a magazine called Bus and Truck Transport. I had 5 years with McLean Hunter. I became the editor. 5 very happy years. I learned a lot and met my wife.
You never did make the mistake of moving into the ink-stained wretch field as an actual reporter.
No, I wanted to.
You worked in the Vancouver Sun for a couple of weeks, did you not?
Well, I didn't work. I sat on the desk and went out on assignments when I was doing in high places. I always wanted to work on a newspaper, but I wasn't able to. When I was when I first left school, I didn't get to high school, and they wouldn't accept anyone who hadn't been there. Then, after the war, I made...
No education?
No, I had education. They crammed a lot in Britain up to age 14. But after the war, I went to the Toronto newspapers, and they said, you have to get experience in newspapers. And I said, how do you get it? Well, there was no answer. I never did get into a newspaper.
Jolly good. So, Arthur, everything you wanted to ask Arthur Hailey but have been afraid to, you've got one segment to have at. The Arthur Hailey. Overload.
Well...
What? Hold on, please. How do we go, Linda? Any bright calls, Linda? Yes, I think so. Arthur, you know, we're on television, but we're still using the odd phone segment.
Yes?
It's a good people participation thing. Go ahead to Arthur Hailey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you guys today?
Fine.
Good. Can you tell me how long it took to write Airport and how you went about it?
Most of my books take 3 years. I don't watch a calendar or a stopwatch, but the first year I do nothing but travel and talk with people and find out about the background, just plain learning. And by a process of osmosis, I try to become a part of that
Just
milieu
on that,
myself.
do you come back and do you tape record everything every night? I think you do.
Yes, I do. I don't make notes normally when I'm with people, but I do make a quick note when I leave them, and then I dictate a detailed note, just everything I can think of that they've said and what the background was like and so on. And those are typed by my secretary, so that a couple of years later I can recall that moment. Then after that year of research, I go back, see what I've got, describe my characters, the main theme, the subsidiary themes, and write a series of outlines, changing all the time. It's slow, hard work, and then after that, about a year and a half of solid writing.
They tell me, too, that you still bash it out with your own fingers, the final analysis, the final version.
Yes, I write it in longhand first because I think best that way. Then I put it on a typewriter and revise it and retype it. I must see it clean. I'm a very slow writer.
You can't dictate a chapter of a book.
I can't.
You can't.
I can't, no.
Kelowna, go ahead, please. I'm sorry, where is that, Linda? Victoria. Victoria, go ahead, please.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Hailey. I just thought I'd let you know I like the way you write. Having read your books, I feel that, you know, anybody reading it seems to be right there when it happens.
Well, thank you. That's the nicest thing that can be said. Actually, that's a very astute remark because sometimes young writers ask me for advice, and I say, never describe a scene by hindsight. Let the reader be there to share in it. That's very important.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Hailey?
Yes?
I'd like to know, I read one of your stories many years ago. It was called Flight into Danger. And I was wondering whether that was a shortened version of Runway 08, or was it a separate story in itself?
I apologize to you and several million others for confusion about that title. My original television play was called Flight into Danger. It was made into a book before I started writing books, written by 2 writers under the pseudonym John Castle, using my dialogue in my play. When it came out in Britain, the title was Flight into Danger. The American publisher said, we don't like this title, call it something else. And in an offhand moment, I said, Runway 08. And that has created a confusion which I've regretted ever since. They're exactly the same book, and I apologize if you bought both.
You bought both, and you send one to him, he'll send you the money back.
Okay, then. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My offer, not yours. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Hailey.
Good morning.
How many books have you written so far?
There are 8 novels and a book of plays.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
indeed. Simple question. They want to be able to say at night, I spoke to Arthur Hailey today. Go ahead, please. Where are you?
Good morning.
That's you.
Good morning, Miss Webster, and this is Mr. Hailey, please.
Yes?
I think it's very great of him to live the way he wants to live and be free. And one other thing I'd like to ask is, what's the address? Where could I buy that gadget that he's got on his wrist?
As a matter of fact, I don't believe they were on sale in Canada. Certainly last year. Now, they may be, so you might have to get it in the United States, but it's Hewlett-Packard, which is a very, oh, you've got the camera on this, a very well-known brand of calculator, and it really is a lovely little toy, adult toys.
Have you any other gimmicks of comparable magnificence?
Well, I have several calculators in my study, and I have recorders. I'm a sucker for anything mechanical, and my family tend to give me those things as gifts.
Go ahead, please.
Hello. I wanted to tell Arthur Hailey that I used to be a librarian in a hospital, and we used to discuss the books over a great deal. I've read all his books but the new one. And the book that was always enjoyed the most, and I think is his very best, is Final Diagnosis.
Well, thank you.
Had it checked over by our lab technician who wouldn't read any fiction, but he read that and said that your details were impeccable.
Well, that's nice to hear. That book, of course, is medically way out of date now, but people
yes,
go on reading it.
For its time.
That became the movie The Young Doctors.
Yes, it did.
I didn't like the movie The Young Doctors. I didn't like the way they treated it. I liked your book better.
Nor did I.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm high enough. I'm a real estate woman, but I wanted to ask Mr. Hailey.
He made the remark about real estate. I didn't.
I apologize.
Okay, but anyway,
Cheap
yeah,
shot.
I know it was just a facetious thing. But anyway, we've read all your books and looking forward to the new one. But I'm wondering now, with so many books being put out, are a lot of books just a cause for cash? You spend your money on them, and then what have you got when you get them home, in your estimation?
That's a fair question, and I don't know. There's no simple answer. I think too many books are being put out, and it's very hard for a new writer to get attention. This bothers me, and I wish there was some remedy for it. I also find myself resenting nowadays paying, in the U.S., $7.95 for a thin little book, and I know your prices are higher in Canada because of the difference in the dollar now, and I suppose other things. But I try to give people their money's worth, but I think I really haven't much to say to that, because I think basically your observation is true.
I want you to show another picture, too, if you can get it. You see, he looks 55, 58. You know, good-looking guy, good condition. What's your weight?
168.
You don't drink anymore because of your high blood pressure.
Oh, I'm wine is one of my great joys in life. I drink wine every day.
That's very bad for high blood pressure. See how young he looks in the back of the book? I don't know if they can get that or not. I'm not very good on these technical things. See, he looks a veritable 19-year-old boy. When was that taken?
That was taken within the past year. I get so tired of pictures of authors, the conventional ones with a typewriter or against a bookshelf, so I pulled that out and had them use that on the jacket.
Arthur Hailey, I think I hate you. You have your life so well-ordered.
You don't really. That's just your public image, Jack.
No, you're so successful. Well, how big is your boat?
Well, we have a little 17-foot runabout at the bottom of the garden, and I have a 28-foot Bertram Flybridge cruiser for longer distances.
Just a 28-foot?
Just a 28-foot.
No danger of hurricanes, of typhoons in the Caribbean?
Yes. We have some pretty rough weather in the Bahamas. I have a healthy respect for the sea and never go out without studying the forecast. It's much calmer around here.
Is it?
Oh, yes.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Arthur mentioned that he started out with a book of plays. Did that help you develop your dialogue for the novels, and are you going to write any more plays, or do you aspire to write any more plays?
No, I won't write any more plays, but for 3 years I wrote plays for television, and those are the ones which were in the book. And yes, I think the dialogue did help me, and I learned something else from television too. Take off the fat. In a 1-hour television drama, you really don't have any spare time. And now when I'm doing a book, I look at this sentence or that and say, could this be shortened or indeed lopped off? I learned a lot from that time.
Okay, thank you.
Fair enough, 1303. Go ahead. Victoria, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I'd like to talk to Arthur Hailey.
Just go ahead.
Oh, okay. Arthur Hailey, have you read or are you aware of what is said in the book Seth Speaks by Jane Roberts?
No, I'm afraid not.
Why? Why do you raise the subject? What did she say?
Well, basically because I'm getting into it, and it just seems to be looking for a lot of the answers to a lot of the questions that Arthur Hailey himself seems to be looking for.
On the ecology and on the environment, you mean?
No, something much larger than that, much broader than that.
Two species. I must leave you, sir. Arthur, nobody has to plug your books. You put them up and they sell, don't they?
No, a writer makes a mistake about that, because a lot of writers have thought that because their last book was a success, their next one would be automatically. The public reads and buys what it likes. Also, all the promotion and tours in the world won't sell a book that the public regards as a dog.
You will do 300 odd. You did today, the beginning of your tour, you did the US television show today in the morning, didn't you?
Yes, yes.
What other shows, big shows, have you done?
Well,
I mean, on this trip.
This one. Mostly local shows. There are tremendous audiences out there, and I'm constantly impressed by daytime television. I'll do a show at this time or in the afternoon, and you wonder who's out there watching. And for several days afterwards, I'll meet people and say, I saw you on that show. I think that the local shows have tremendous audiences, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm going on my way to Chicago. I'm Dallas and Chicago next week. I go to Seattle tonight, Los Angeles after that, but I hope that snow clears up a little.
Arthur, let me give you a pound of flesh, too. Autographing your book. You'll be there in person.
Yes, I will, today.
At Eaton's Pacific Centre from 12:30 to 1:30.
Right.
You'll chat up the people and give them, but I want a free signature on my free copy.
I'll do that
before
with
you
pleasure.
go. Next, I'm going to deal with the problem of the English composition and the failed by 44.8% of first-year University of BC students. Can they read or can they write, or still don't they know nothing about nothing? My thanks to Arthur Hailey. Andrew, we've done this before, haven't we? Have we not?
No, we haven't. You've probably done it with
Push yourself
Can
in,
I have
sir.
your title,
1 minute
Andrew?
to you now, Jack. Chairman of First Year English.
I'll be right up.
And your title, Dr. Jordan?
No, thanks. Head of the English department.
Yeah, I hope we didn't lose the audience for you.
You did not. No, of course you didn't.
How can we follow your act?
Well, we're back.
Jack, look at the monitor, will you please?
I'm watching the monitor. I can't read the goddamn thing.
Can you see them?
Thanks,
Is it readable on Arthur? One day we'll
30
have a
seconds.
drink.
Can we have somebody to come in? It's too small. It's too small, isn't it? Yeah.
It's too small.
Too small. Too small. Could you?
Dr. Jordan, right?
Keep that count
All
coming
right.
loud. 15 seconds to you, Jack.
I'm warning that to Henry on pain of
Time,
death. No more snide remarks about the entrance exams on composition for students at the University of British Columbia. I think this morning we'll have a fairly good, calm look at the problem which has arisen not only this year, but again and again and again. And this time round, it seems that almost 50% of first-year University of BC students who wrote the annual Christmas test failed a fairly simple composition test. And my guests this morning are Dr. Robert Jordan, who is head of the English department at the University of British Columbia, and Dr. Andrew Parkin, who is chairman of the First Year English, what?
First Year English.
First Year English at the University of British Columbia. Gentlemen, first to you, Dr. Jordan, have we got real reasons to be perturbed about the lack of functional literacy in former high school students doing their first year at UBC?
I think we have very real reasons to be perturbed. If our society is to function at its best levels, language is the medium in which we function, and I think we have a considerable reason to be disturbed.
And is it worse this year than before? For how many years now have you been conducting these tests? And how disturbed are you, Dr. Parkin?
Well, we've been having these tests at UBC for about 5 years. And last year the failure rate was up a little on the previous year, and this year it's up a little on last year. Now, I don't know whether this is a trend, but it's quite clear from the beginning of the test period that we've had this check on composition that students are really coming into university inadequately prepared.
By the high schools? Or is it by the students, or by the high schools, or is it by both?
Well, I have never been willing to lay the blame on any single agency, certainly not the high schools. I think the high school teachers have a very heavy load and they do it very conscientiously, but they have problems not of their own making. So I would not lay the blame on high school teachers. Writing is a very complicated process.
But where else can we lay the blame?
The trouble is that we can't look for a quick solution to a problem as complicated as this. Writing is a very complex process. It involves a complicated series of perceptions and of translations of perception into language. It's a very difficult matter. Improvement in writing requires the kind of intimate attention to students' work that high school teachers simply don't have the time to give. That's the nuts and bolts of the question. But beyond that, there are a lot more influences at work on students than their high school teachers. And that's something we often fail to acknowledge.
The influence of the magic monster television, of course, is probably one of the things which caused the drop in reading by youngsters.
Maybe. I think that a home background where there's reading encouraged and parents read to the children regularly at an early age so that the children get the reading habit, people from that background are going to be at a first-rate advantage over those
How
who...
tough was the test you gave to the students? I don't know if we can put it up on the monitor or not. Perhaps you should tell me first, anyway. What the test, this composition test you give to first-year English students at Christmas time. And this is after they've been under your aegis, under your orbit for 3 months or so, is it not?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, well...
I hesitate to say give me the test on air because I'm so smug about my command of the English language. My knowledge is probably abysmal.
You would have no difficulty in passing the test, Jack, nor would anyone who had come out of the old system, leaving school at 14, rather like Arthur Hailey. No, I think that the test was, to answer your question, the first part of the test is a passage of prose from either an academic or some other writer. It could be history, it could be anything. And the point is that there are 3 or 4 or 2 questions, according to the examiners each year, which test the students' reading comprehension. And they're fairly simple, straightforward questions.
You got to give me the test. Is it too dangerous? Is it too long?
No, the test is public. High school teachers who phone into UBC get copies of this test if they so desire. You can see there's a passage of prose
Yeah,
here.
a fairly lengthy passage of prose.
Right.
I thought maybe I might have been able to read it right now and ask myself the questions and answers, but
Then
I
there are
couldn't.
3 questions there, and then there's an essay, and the students have a choice out of a few essay topics. This year it was 2 essay topics, and the essay topics are connected with issues that arise from the passage.
Yeah, the essay topic here is based on partly the essay, and it says, there is no revolt, no strike, no competition, no anti-anything party in a beehive. To what extent would this situation be desirable in human society? Support your answer with specific examples. That's a good question. Did you get good answers?
No, we got some good answers. We got 55% pretty good answers.
But it's not a particularly difficult question, is it?
No, and the students have 2 hours in which to do this test. So
to write 300 words?
Well, 1.5 hours for 300 words, roughly, I would say. And that means that no student really, unless he's the sort that has difficulties with the language because his first language is not English, no student is really pushed for time.
Is it not a fact that your students whose first language is not English are, almost on the face of it, your very best students at UBC? Or
No.
is that too broad a generalization?
I think that's too broad a generalization. I couldn't support that.
No, it's just that when one goes out to graduation, one sees so many keen, clean-cut, non-original Canadian people who seem to dominate everything.
Well, many of the more recent immigrants certainly do have
They try hard.
high motivational quality. They work very hard and they're highly motivated. Yes, that's quite true.
Well,
that's a generalization.
Having achieved this depressing news once again, Doctors Parkin and Jordan, what are you going to do about it this year?
We're going to continue doing what we're doing and try to improve as much as we can. But as I say, it's a generational process. One doesn't produce a competent writer in 3 months or 6 months if the student has not had any experience to speak of with language except what he's heard on the radio or TV, perhaps.
So what you're telling me, some of what he hears on radio or TV ain't exactly the best English.
Well, not many of them can listen to the Jack Webster show because they're in school.
It's a pity, you know.
I know.
A great pity, but I mean, really, does this mean that when these youngsters take this 44.8% fail, that you now have to spend public money giving them a remedial English training before they can go on to get their degree in whatever and come out as a properly functioning graduate?
Exactly.
What a
The money has been spent already.
How much are you spending a year on remedial training?
I'm not sure.
It was 100,000 at one time.
It's probably close to that when all of the costs are put together. It's a gathering of costs, teacher salaries, upkeep, overhead, all the rest of it. It probably comes to something like that.
Okay, this affects your graduates and your families, 44.8%? No, that's not fair, is it? It's only 44.8% of whom?
Of the freshman
first year.
class. That's out of 3,200 students, 44% fail at Christmas, but then they get another chance, we must not forget. They get further instruction and another chance in April.
That makes it even worse. That means it's about 1,500 or 1,400 out of 3,200 fail their English at Christmas.
That's
What
about
happens if they fail in April?
They repeat. But in April, the failure rate last year, although it was up at Christmas, went down a little bit, and it was 17% who failed the total course.
Oh, that's a vast improvement, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But that means that after 1 year in university, 17% of that particular group still failed their English.
Right, yeah.
Webster, Parkin and Jordan, who are a little bit academic this morning, but I've no doubt you'll want to join in and blame everybody in sight, including me, after this break. You tell me, Dr. Parkin, we're going through anonymously. Is this one essay or is this a
No, that's just one.
That's one
actual
essay. We're not going to identify it, but give me some of the basic. These are people of how old? 19?
18, 19. People who, some of them have real problems in knowing exactly what a sentence is. I mean, for instance, in this essay, we have a sentence, thus no strikes caused by dissatisfaction over work, no revolts caused by dissatisfaction off the ruling class, no competition.
Off the ruling class.
No competition caused by individualism and independent thought, and no anti-anything parties, since everybody had no opinion. And then you're waiting for the rest of the sentence, which isn't there, because the main clause
there's
is
another
not
one
there.
here hit me right in the eye, too. It was about, we have to define our own society. Define. D-I-F-I-N-E. Does that matter, though? Does bad spelling make for bad composition?
Bad spelling is a good indication that the student has never been trained or never learned to use his eyes, and it goes beyond that. He's never been trained to use his other senses either. The quality of precision is something that has simply slipped out of our social values, and it reflects itself in...
I'm glad to hear that because, you know, I've been such a reactionary, I feel, on this thing by insisting on people spelling around me and whatnot, that I'm beginning to wonder if I'm wrong. For instance, this fellow here, the use of words. If human society was in such a situation, there would be many disadvantages, such as the lose, L-O-S-E, of man's personality or ambition. Does he know that he's saying lose, or does he think that lose is how you spell loss? You're right there, be it man or woman.
How do we know?
How
But
can you tell?
one of the things I do with students when they come to me with bad essays, I make them read them aloud to me, Jack. And that's one thing that makes people listen to their own mistakes.
Oh, here's a gem here. Oh my goodness, I wish we'd had time to put these up. I might keep this and, oh, it's not maybe fair to take it from one. In such and such a book, just such a society was depict, D-E-P-I-C-T. Is it conceivable that he didn't know that that was the present instead of the past tense of depict? To depict, depicted? Could he have known that?
It could be that writing under speed,
It may be, of course,
pressure.
we're back to Dr. Jordan's very perceptive remark that we have lost sight of the need for precision in today's society.
That is probably, in my estimation, a case of a student depending on his ear rather than his eye. And he might have not heard it well or not cared whether he heard it well or not. But rarely would he have seen it spelled.
Here's a beauty here. Now this, of course, hits me right in the eye. Whereas. How do you spell whereas?
Me?
Yeah.
W-H-E-R-E-A-S.
And this comes out as whereas. W-H-E-R-A-S. Now, that looks like a word from what's the word this? From Bengali. Whereas. Doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, these essays, I might
This is just
say,
one of many.
Oh, surely.
This is not necessarily the worst.
No, no. And these are by native speakers. They're not essays that we've taken from non-native speakers.
New Canadians, people whose language is other than English. Well, I don't know what you do. Does anyone know how to use an apostrophe?
Some people do, yes.
55%
Many
of the
don't.
people do.
I've got to come back to this business. Do apostrophes matter anymore?
Well, if precision matters, apostrophe matters. It's a generational thing, as I said, and I think that it's going to be a long time. We have to be patient, and if we have any sense of preserving the values that we believe are important, we're going to do our best to do that.
Fact remains that you are now attempting to cope with, say, 45% of your English 100 students who are starting out in university with what kind of a handicap? Is it an insuperable handicap so that they can get the benefit?
It's not insuperable because many of these students manage to pass the course by the end of the year. But it's a hurdle that is unnecessary. We shouldn't be teaching this at university. And we're wanting people to write at the university level.
Why can't you people say arbitrarily, I know the answer, but why can't you say, you will sit an examination, and if you do not pass this examination in English, finito benito, you won't get in?
Well, you do know the answer, and I'm sure everybody listening knows the answer as well. It becomes a political issue at that level. As a matter of fact, the Senate at UBC 3 years ago did pass a resolution stating that it was not the business of the university to teach school-level English, and that beginning in 1979, students who could not conform to an acceptable level would not be admitted. That's on the books, and it's our assumption that that will be enacted. However, the means for enacting it have not been forthcoming.
I know, I've got to get this in detail. 3 years ago, did you say the Senate? Or
the Senate, which is
the Senate said, we're sick and tired of teaching people English. Beginning in 1979, if they can't use acceptable English on their entrance examination, they won't get in.
Not on their entrance examination. That phrase was not included for the reasons I just mentioned. But it was stated that students who cannot meet university-level standards in the use of language will not be admitted. What the means will be to determine who meets those standards or who doesn't was left up in the air, and a Senate committee is charged with working that out.
For 1979?
Well, that's right.
That'll mean the fall of 79.
That's right.
Would you care to make any predictions on how it's going to be worked out? Would you give any recommendations on how it should be worked out?
Of course, vitally interested myself, since we have a few plans to make in the English department, depending upon how this is determined.
You mean like cut your staff in half?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that.
No, you see what I'm jumping at.
Redistribute our resources, certainly. Yes.
You know, that is the key of the whole. Does that mean, you know, as basically a nosy reporter, that we have a crunch coming up? Or because of the political aspects, will the crunch just dissolve like melting snow?
I'm not going to hazard an answer. I wish I knew the answer.
But we are on the record right now from the Senate that students who cannot meet university level standards in the use of English will not be admitted to UBC in 1979.
That's right, with one small exception of those students who are demonstrably outstanding in subjects other than English. For outstanding students, an exception will be made.
I mean, really.
I mean, a very talented scientist or what have you.
Gentlemen, we've opened, we can't say a can of worms, that's not acceptable English. We have entered a phase which will cause some public attention for some months to come, because how is it going to be done? Because if you chopped off all the people who can't speak English, the enrollment at UBC, does everybody have to take English?
Everyone in first year takes English, you know.
He could cut the enrollment of UBC by 44.8%.
I don't think that would happen.
No, neither do I. No, neither do I. We both realize the political truths with which we are faced.
Yeah.
Webster, Doctors Jordan and Parkin endure perceptive, carefully spoken, grammatically correct comments and questions to my guests. UBC, and they are perturbed about the continued failure of far too high a percentage of students taking English 100 in their Christmas examinations. Why don't we have full-scale entrance examinations for university?
The political leaders believe that the public would not like that.
It would deny entry to too many people.
Possibly so.
There's a whole other economic thing behind it, but let's go to the phones anyway. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. In February of 1977, the University's Council of BC put out a report from which I would like to quote, wherein they said, whereas 1/3 of the brightest children of the poor in Canada do not survive the final years of high school, 1/3 of the stupidest children of the rich clutter up our universities. Would this be the reason for the percentage, the low percentage in English? One of the reasons?
He said 1/3 of the poorest children don't survive high school for various reasons, whereas 1/3 of the stupidest of the richer people get into university. I don't know if you can relate those things. I suppose there's a philosophical problem there. Pressures on youngsters who just can't get to university.
Well, those are quantitative issues, numbers of people from this class or that class. So certainly the one quantitative factor that's inescapable is that a larger percentage of the population is attending university now than was the case 15 years ago.
In fact, the population of the university has not dropped to any appreciable extent, has it?
No, it hasn't.
Galliano, go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Speak up, ma'am.
Yes. Good morning. I think that too many parents blame the system, the school system, where the fault, 75% of it, rests with them. It's too easy to let children watch television instead of reading to them, having them love books by the time they're very small. And I think parents are really to blame in that respect. They expect the school to do everything. School cannot do everything. The parents have to do it, most of it. Also, I would like to see the examination brought back in the school system. It gives me an idea as a parent of where my child stands within his peers. I may think he's very smart and then realize all of a sudden when I got the examination that he's
not so smart. Matter of fact, we had Nathan Davinsky on the other day, and he exhorts, and he's one of your people, advocates, he says the form of examination in the Vancouver school system just now is not really an examination at all. The teacher sets her own exams, and therefore all she can test is what she's taught them. And she may not be a very good teacher.
Sure.
Matter of fact, your university has come under some strictures because a number of the teachers coming out of your education faculty apparently are not very good in grammar and English composition. Would you agree to that?
I agree to that.
Would you agree to that?
I would, yeah.
What are you doing about it?
I'm doing all I can in English 100 because that's where we're sifting the first year students.
Now, if a person's going for teaching, that's indicated the moment they join UBC, isn't it?
Surely, yeah.
Would you strongly discourage somebody who doesn't know the difference between lose and loss?
I would make sure that the person, if he was in my class, knew the difference.
Shouldn't that be if he were in my class?
Yeah.
No, seriously. I'm pedantic about that. If it's conditional, do you use were instead of was?
Yes, if you're writing, but in conversation, I think
you can say if he was in my class, quite acceptable.
Sure.
Not trying to trip you up, unless you make an obvious blooper and I shall jump on you.
Okay.
But similarly, feel free to jump on me.
Surely, yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Is that me?
Where from? Fernie?
Vernon.
Vernon? Yes. Oh, I'm getting a little deaf.
Look, I've lived in England and I've lived in this country for about 5 years. And it seems that the same problem crops up time and again about university students and their preparation in terms of the English language and their competency. Now, do you think the reason for this is that for the past 10 to 15 years or so, there has been a whole philosophy, a new philosophy in the school systems and amongst the educationists, that children should never be subjected to any form of discipline. Let's say in the learning processes I'm thinking of, that everything should be enjoyment, that we should have the open plan school, that children should more or less dictate what they want to do, etc., rather than, the old rigid forms of education, which produced people like Einstein. We certainly, the mathematics...
Okay, I think we've got the general thrust of your question. I don't want a lengthy speech.
Sorry, I'm just wondering whether this is the main reason for the present situation.
A lack of discipline, you're saying, in effect?
Yeah.
Okay, doctors?
Well, I certainly think in general that there's a good deal of truth in what the gentleman is saying. For the past 15 years or 20 years, a school was a place to make young people feel good rather than to help them to learn good habits and to learn to absorb some knowledge. But there's much more to it than that. I don't think it's a single answer problem. For example, young people for a generation have learned to live by their ears rather than their eyes and their brains. The whole popular music syndrome has had a tremendous effect on the generation presently entering university. And in that scheme of values, slovenliness is a kind of virtue. What pop singer or pop tune articulates language clearly?
Can't hear a word of it.
Well, that's the point, and students have learned not to recognize, let alone admire, standards of clarity and precision in the use of the language.
But when they come into English 100 with Dr. Parkin here, suddenly they're faced with a discipline. Is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, do you insist on a discipline? I don't mean a physical discipline, but a discipline of completing work.
I think most people who teach English 100 are very concerned about accuracy, precision of thought, precision of writing, clarity of thought, clarity of writing. The things go together. Writing is one way of learning how to think.
So meanwhile, now that you start again, are you putting on special classes for these youngsters? Or do you merely hit them over the head and say, go back and read your old high school books?
We have regular sections of English 100, and those are our normal approach to teaching these students. Then we have remedial groups, intensive composition groups, which meet 5 hours a week instead of 3 hours a week. And those are for people who have severe writing problems. Usually, English is the second language of these students. Then we have workshops, which are an additional 2 hours a week for people who are in regular sections but who are having less severe writing problems than the ones in the intensive composition sections. We also have what we call Z sections, which are self-selecting, and these are for students who are pretty competent writers and they wish to move at a faster pace and perhaps cover a little more literature.
So they can go at their own speed, but you've got to take those ones who've failed and direct them into specific sections, right? and hope for the best that it'll drop to 17% failure.
We hope, yes.
Yeah, if you get 17% failure at the end of your first full year, do you throw them out?
Oh, no.
Do you jump them?
No, they repeat the course.
Or they go back and do the first year English again?
Yes.
While carrying on with their second year studies and other things?
Yes. Many of that 17% are students who have English as a second language.
We're not too worried about them, though, are we?
I think we should be.
Yeah, but the ones that
Well, their problems are different, and it is true that they require a very special kind of attention.
That's understandable.
It's perfectly understandable, of course. It's the other group, the native speakers, who are the most worrisome.
The ones we worried about are those who have been 13 years or something in the school system with English as their native language, who still don't know how to use an apostrophe or spell nephew. These kind of people, isn't it?
And it's worrying too if they cannot read properly.
Well, if they can't spell, they can't read. Am I right?
Usually they go together.
Wouldn't you like to take over the high school system's English for a while, Dr.
I used to
Parkin?
teach English in a high school.
Were you one of the culp? Oh, in England?
Yes, and also in Hong Kong. And my experience as a secondary school teacher was that we taught people to write to the level these people are writing, most of our students by the age of about 16. And I think that should be the goal, because people may leave school at 16, and it's really shortchanging the population of any country. And of course, it's politically very dangerous if we say, oh, well, it doesn't matter about the mass of the population. Only those who are going to university need know how to write,
Very good point.
think, or read properly.
In other words, there should
it's
be
the right of people who are up to the age of 16 to be able to read properly and to write clearly.
So you would jack up the whole system to bring it through to the age of 16 where they'd be ready for English 100.
Surely.
Webster, Parkin and Jordan. Doctors from the University of British Columbia, Dr. Jordan, the head of the English department, and Dr. Parkin, who's chairman of the First Year English at UBC. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster and your guests. I'm really a uptight mother. I have 5 sons. I appreciate the youth of Canada. I appreciate all the things we've tried in the last 15, 20 years, my oldest boy being 24, from the different learning methods that we've gone through. Some of my boys have not had phonics. They've not had to spell. They have not had to even read. It's been on a sight basis. Sounded. A lot of it's by, as one gentleman mentioned, by the ears, where I know 85% should be by sight for a learning, good learning. But my main bone of contention, Mr. Webster, is everybody in British Columbia in the teaching professions seem to have a snobbery about them. They have the attitude of individualism. I am going to teach this class how to communicate the best way I know how, and they use their own self-expressions. We have no basic laid-out standard for learning. Then when there is a problem, and they've had problems over the years, dyslexic, ambiguous, I'm not going to go into all that, you've had enough of that, Jack, and you approach these teachers, they say, well, this is the new method. As they get into grade 8, pow, down comes the sledgehammer on these kids. They can't read, they can't write, they can't spell. They couldn't even leave me a note on the table that makes sense some days, and I'm not an educated woman. And I've gone to the schools, and some areas you cannot get help. You cannot get assistance for these learning programs, both in math and in your English areas. I've asked, why can't they go to night school at 13 and 14 when they want it? And they're begging me, we need help, Mom. I can't afford a private tutor. They are not allowed to go to night school because they're not 15, 16.
How old are your boys now?
I've got one 24 and my baby is 13.
Can he read, write, and spell?
Who?
Your 13-year-old.
He's doing the best of them all, but I've had to learn a very hard lesson in life.
How about your 24-year-old?
He's doing it on his own now again. I have a 22-year-old that's finally gone back to school. But what I'm asking is, why are the teachers afraid of competition? Why can't these kids go to night school and get their math and English? The Chinese kids get it. $8, $10, I'd pay $20 if they could go to night school any time from 13 on.
Now, there's a plea from the heart of what seems to be a concerned mother.
To go to summer school at 14 and 15 time jobs, or I want them with me.
What about it, gentlemen? Is she right?
Well, that's certainly a depressing comment on our school systems, to find a mother this desperate to spend extra money to send her children to extra schooling. A very depressing comment.
Could probably raise you dozens of them if we had time to go through all the calls. But I mean, why can't there be competition to establish a standard at certain times? You have competition to establish standards the moment we get to UBC, don't you?
Yes, I think some teachers are doing this in some of the schools. I've spoken to teachers in groups, and I know that there are some teachers who are carrying out across the grade tests in composition now, and having committee marking of the exam that they set, rather than just marking it individually. And that gives a more impersonal marking.
Yeah, but the fact is that they're totally unprepared for the competition of filling an exam when they come to you in English 100. Is that not correct?
Well, many of them, yes.
Well, we're talking about two different areas, which are, of course, related. One is attitudes toward teaching and learning, and the other is techniques of teaching. And as far as techniques go, it's, I suppose, the job, it is the job of the Faculty of Education to teach specific techniques of how outgoing teachers will handle problems of learning.
Are you people connected with the techniques used in the Department of in the Teachers College?
No.
Shouldn't you be?
I think they must be in order for my child to go to university. How can it be one way or the other?
I mean, if you're going to be the final arbiters of what the standard of English is for the university degree, shouldn't you be laying down the standards for how English is taught so that it'll come back to you in a generation in a certain manner?
Well, we do that. What we observe is a distinction between the Faculty of Arts and university in general on the one hand and the Faculty of Education on the other. And our job in the English department of the Faculty of Arts is to teach students composition as well as other aspects of language and literature. They come through us and then move into the Faculty of Education, where they are understood to be taught techniques of transmitting what is known about how to teach these things. It's a kind of two-stage operation. We do our best to prepare students by immersing them in the activity of reading and writing and thinking. What happens in the Faculty of Education, perhaps you should have some
I think maybe I should have. I think
faculty.
maybe they should be a target to see if they accept any of the responsibility. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask these gentlemen if there's any oral part to this examination.
No.
Entirely written.
It's entirely written.
I see. Now, don't get me wrong. I loved English, and I really pursued it with almost a fanatical zeal. But it seems to me in this day and age that it's a little bit ironic when we're talking about standards of communication, which is what we're talking about, communication, being able to communicate with each other. And I sit here on the phone and look at you and talk to you on TV. It seems to me that maybe that's where some of that gap is coming in. Maybe that's, I mean, there's certainly these students are communicating among themselves. They're communicating with their friends, their peers, their parents, and they have their own system of communication. And perhaps maybe the standards that you're setting down and establishing maybe isn't wide enough, maybe isn't encompassing as much as it should.
Good question.
We do have an oral component in English 100 in that many of the classes are conducted as discussions, and therefore students do have an opportunity to talk in class and to communicate orally. And we also have debates, and UBC has now got a debating society which is resurrected, and they're winning competitions against other universities.
But the fact remains that you can't move from your position whereby it's got to be this precision in expressing one's thoughts on paper and in reading those thoughts from paper, which is the mark of the educated person.
Well, I would, the caller, I think, does have a point. I would...
Just a minute, caller. I've got to take a break. I'm running late. Hold on, and then you can ask me the question. After this break. See?
Just wanted to suggest one more thing, and that is I really sympathize with the chap who teaches English 100, but I suggest maybe if he tried using some of the technological tools that we have available at our fingertips these days. You can go to Radio Shack and buy, or anywhere, and buy a computer, plug it into the TV, hook a phone up, and have students talking to each other. And at the same time have a computer printout and a bleep that says that's wrong. Now, that might be a little more interesting to the student than sitting down and writing a droll piece of script, which he may also should be required to do, but let's widen our horizons a little bit. Let's catch up with this technology. These are tomorrow's people, and these are the people that are going to determine the decision whether they speak English or not.
I don't even know what he's talking about, so how far out of date I am. Do you know what he's talking about?
Yeah, I think this is a fallacy of modern education that for some years now people have been saying, look, we've got all these technological aids. You learn how to write by practicing writing again and again, and by having people who know how to write themselves correcting the work that you're doing. You learn how to write by reading as well.
Are you telling me that technological aids, schmechnological aids, that you've got to get back to basics?
I think you have, and I'm not decrying technological aids, but...
Gutenberg changed all that.
Maybe he changed it as far as it should have gone, however, but thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Yes, ma'am.
I wrote the English 100 exam this year. I passed, and I'm also in the education department. And I'm a wee bit nervous also.
No. Just carry on.
I think the major problem with this English 100 exam, as they call it, is that the students are not prepared in such a way as to think of examples for themselves, think of what to write on. I mean, I came up with those exam questions, and I found the exam particularly easy to write. Now, I feel I've had a good background in writing and with examples, but I also think that some students aren't. And I don't think that it's necessarily all the school's fault, but I do think it's a great percentage of it. I think with these exams, now, I went to look at my exam to see where the parts that I may have fallen down in, and there's not one mark on that book, not one mistake. And I know I'm not I don't write perfectly. I know that.
So you got 100%?
No, I didn't. This is it. I passed, but I certainly didn't write a perfect exam. I know there's mistakes in there, and I spotted one myself that hadn't been marked.
Well, that's because the marking committees don't mark up every script. We have over 3,000 scripts to mark within a few days. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that markers will go through a script and decide whether it's a pass or a fail. And they don't necessarily put corrections on that script as the sort of correction that you'd get on an essay that you did during class, during the year.
I see. Now, don't you think that's a disadvantage for the students who fail, who would like to see their exam and the part that they've fallen down in?
No.
That would be a benefit to them?
Oh, but the student who fails is perfectly at liberty, as you did, to go to the instructor and ask what the problems were in that exam, and an instructor will go over the exam and point out the errors at that stage. It isn't that the student will never see what the errors were.
Ma'am, did you go to a school in Vancouver?
Yes, I did.
Which school?
Killarney Secondary.
Which one?
Killarney Secondary.
Killarney Secondary.
Yes.
There I must take a break and give my thanks to Dr. Jordan and Dr. Parkin from UBC. I don't know what we've learned, except one key thing of which I shall remind you after this particular break. Maybe the composition and essays will be much better and all passable next year, because like at the Lumpet, on the Senate of UBC right now is the ruling that students who cannot meet English level standards, university level standards in the use of English, will not be admitted in 1979. They've got to decide what they're going to do. Tomorrow, Linda.
David Hellawell from the BC Resources Investment Corporation.
Oh, the 5 free shares.
Yes.
That should be good fun. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. precisely.